Christy and Tanqueray on the Rocks, the Trailblazers Toolkit.
On this podcast, we dive into the messy realities of corporate life that nobody talks about over office coffee.
Grab your cocktails and join us as we get real about work, life, and everything in between. Cheers.
I am not, again, an expert in workplace discrimination and harassment, but I have done more presentations and speaking about it lately because it has been such, I feel like this came up like a couple years ago, this term, obviously microaggressions, but we really didn't talk through them as much. It was just so we were able to name the things we were experiencing, but like to actually have conversations of like, well, what do you do about it? How do you know, what can you do? How do you heal from it? And so I've been doing more of that lately. And one thing that came up is like, if they are egregious, consistent, right? Targeted, they're a form of harassment. So we hear workplace discrimination and harassment, right? There's policies against it in most workplaces and institutions, but we never actually say, what does this look like? You don't have to take those on. If they're coming from multiple sources, right? And then that's a cultural problem, right? There's a pattern of behaviors that the workplace is responsible for changing. If it's consistent from a human, like the same human, right? Then that's probably going to be a harassment thing. So the documentations of these microaggressions, while you might not think they are that egregious, like we really should be taking them when they happen and where they happen and how they happen, because it could be something that could be reportable in the workplace. And so that's something I think we miss or gloss over because we are used to taking them, or we're used to getting, the older I get, the more witty I get and the more I respond, but I also have what I consider less at risk, probably because my seniority have more at risk, right? But I have more street cred, right? I'm also like, I'm choosing where I'm showing up and who I'm working for and what I'm doing in my work and where I'm not going to work. That's a privilege that I have built on, where I was more early in career. I didn't have that privilege, right? I had to take all that in and I didn't know any better. And so I want to make sure that in this time together, we realize that a lot of the things we're talking about is a form of discrimination and harassment in some level.
Yep, absolutely. And it leads to like that hostile, unwelcoming environment, the decreased morale, people are less productive, they're not innovative. And then you hear leaders out there like, oh, I want to have this uber, innovative culture. And, I want to have, everyone collaborating. Well, if people don't feel safe and you can't pronounce their names, like none of that's gonna happen. Like you're not gonna have those environments.
There's no psychological safety in the workplace, right? So if your mental load is completely tied up with just surviving the workplace, how can you spend time on being creative or innovative or managing? Or if you feel hostility in meetings, in your office physical space, in the mental brainstorming space. I read the statistic recently that women on the Supreme Court are interrupted, I think something like 19 more times than their male counterparts. So to your point, Tanqueray, if women are told to speak up and, oh, you wanna move up, you need to speak up, you need to like, but how am I supposed to speak up if I'm interrupted more than my male counterparts? Or like Bray was saying, I can say something that's groundbreaking in a meeting. Nobody hears me. My colleague, who's probably white or male, says the same thing I just said later in the meeting, repeats the same exact thing. That is brilliant. Oh, we're going to go with that. That is a great idea. The great allies will be like, well, actually, Saeed's just said it.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, thanks, my dude, or thanks, colleague. Those are really great allies when they're doing that. But most of the time, they just take the credit for themselves because they spoke up louder, or the person who's leading the meeting doesn't want me to have the idea because it's me. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm not gonna take this personal, but should I take this personal? Is this a macro aggression? Not a macro. Is this a macro aggression to my life? So I think all of those things, like how do I navigate psychological safety? Because, yes, I've come to a place too, like Sunny said, where maybe I can, get a new job or do something else where I can take those risks, or I'm a more senior leader, so I'm not scared to call those things out. But when I was younger too, I was like, dang, this place sucks. I need a new job. Or like, this
I
is
need
never
to
going to
go.
change.
I need to
I
go.
need to go
Yep.
because nothing's going to change. If the senior leaders at this place are acting like this, or people are, walling out in these meetings, like, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe.
Mhm.
There's no support. I didn't have allies. I'm constantly not heard, or, or I talk about a lot in my research, self-shielding behavior that women of color have to use. I know Brene Brown talks a lot about like the armor that you wear and removing your armor, but I don't really think that applies to women of color or to marginalized identities, I'll say in general, because you are too scared to take your armor off. There's not enough psychological safety for you to be vulnerable at work.
So ever,
Um,
ever.
yeah,
Mhm.
like my
Yeah,
husband told me the other
that's
day,
a great.
you can't have a bad day at work, Titus. You're not allowed to have a bad day because you'll be chastised. That's used against you. It comes up in your performance review. Crying is a form of weakness. All these things that like show my human emotion are used against me as a woman of color in the workplace and come out. Yeah, like be yourself. You have to keep your armor on. And you self-shield because you're like, I'm tired of these little tiny jabs every single day, all day. So you self-shield. You code switch. You sometimes decide who you have lunch with, or what meetings you attend, or what project you choose, or like, what, I could say something and this would really contribute to this meeting, but you know what? Then I'm gonna have to do all the work all the time. Or, hey, Cybes, what do you think about this Latin perspective? And I'm like, I do not speak on behalf of all Latin people in the
Latin
world.
people.
One, yeah, that's my number one rule in my workplace. Like, y'all do the research. Like, I'm not it. We do not all think alike. We are not monolith. Like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Like, y'all want to be community? This is what community looks like. Like, be ready. Like, we had a really hard thing that we had to do from a work perspective, and it was some historical stuff. And like, I knew the history, okay? But if y'all gonna decide to ride with this, I need y'all to do the history, and then we come back to the table, and I need everybody outside of me to tell me like why this may not make sense. I'm not doing it. Like, I'm not gonna be the one. And yeah, that's like rule number one for me. And for the longest, I was the only Black woman in my space. So I cannot put it on my back.
I do think, not to like pivot us, but I do think when we talk about the communities and being the onlys, I'm a big advocate for employee resource groups. And the reason why they're so important in the workplace, and it's because you can look around and for one instance and not be the only, and have, again, you all look around and be like, we're not monoliths, right? We all have our stories. And just because I'm Indigenous doesn't mean that like I grew up on the res, right? Or I had the same experiences, or my, tribal community is like, I don't go to powwows every weekend. I don't know, whatever that is, the assumptions that are made. And so I do think it's beautiful to have places where, those identities can come together, who probably have just as we all came together, and most of us are women of color in this space and have very similar, stories. I also think about when you were telling your story, stories about like my breaking point, like what was that point where like I didn't hold it together, and what did that look like? And I remember I was working as an engineer, and I was leading a really big high profile project. I got brought in from another organization to do this, and I was in the parking lot. It was a really large parking lot, and I feel like it was I don't know what time of day it was, but it was hard to see. And I drive a black F-150, and I pulled in, and I was going into the facility, and I heard from across the parking lot, "You drive a big black truck. Why don't you drive my big black D?" And I was like, holy, like, and it's like this,
the audacity.
The swirl, like, did that just happen?
Yes.
I hear
it's like
that.
whiplash.
Up in my head, like, the whiplash. I was like, no. And I was so new. And this had been after the comments about my earrings, the comments about my shoes, the comments about my shawls that I was wearing, the comments about, all of the comments. Like, I remember I got handpicked and brought in to lead the project team, and I had a different background, and somebody said, what are you doing here? You're not capable of doing, like, you don't know anything about this, what we're doing here. And I was like, you should ask the people who hired me to bring me in here. Like, I mean, just like the assumption that because I had a different background, I wasn't capable to lead that team. In fact, your senior
invalidating.
Yeah. And so all of these things, and I remember instead of going to the facility, I walked over to another building, and I had actually, she happened to be Indigenous, but it was just a good friend, and I walked over to her, and I knew she was actually in the environmental health and safety organization. She actually was the one who trained the forklift drivers and the heavy equipment drivers. And she was so good. And she was little and petite and wore high heels because she was so little all the time. It made her feel great, right? And I was like, listen, sis, like this just happened. And I remember being outside the building and thinking like, everybody's gonna see me cry, but I had broken down so hard. And she was like, every day I get a comment too. And it just, the weight and the heaviness that I felt that like, I had been in a team before that it was all men, but I was very protected. I was very respected. They knew what I was capable of. They wanted me there. I had my sponsor, right? My white man sponsor, who was a really big champion for me. I really was in a really safe space. And I just remember going into navigating a new space where people didn't know who I was, except the people who brought me into that space, and was like, she can do anything. I want her to do this. And also I knew there was like jealousy that had to be in there, right? Like I'm the new kid on the block, right? People had a lot of street cred. Like the team was handpicked to lead this really high profile project for the company. I was the only woman of color engineer. Like it was a lot. And I was also like, I'm good at what I do. Let's roll. And so I was very, outspoken. I was leading our women's initiative. And so people were like, who's this unicorn demon woman? I don't know, whatever they were calling, depends who you were, what you were calling me. And I was a trailblazer, and they were intimidated. And I just remember feeling the weight of that and what I was experiencing, and realizing I was in the clean rooms, and you're masked up, and so you can't see anything. And I would hear comments, and I didn't know who was saying it because I was new, and you can't identify people with just their eyes. I mean, it was just all of those things. And so I went to, we had a women's initiative meeting on a Friday afternoon, and I went to my boss, who was a white man, and he was like, I am so sorry. And he was so shocked and so like appalled. And I was like, thankfully he was a safe space, right? And he was like, do you guys talk about these things in the women's initiative? I was like, I don't know, we're brand new. Let's go see. And he went with me to it. And I spoke up in that meeting. There was only like 6 people in that meeting. It was a Friday afternoon. Everybody was probably gone. They probably were rightfully so gone. It was like at 3:00, I remember. And I had said, I've been experiencing these things. And every single woman in that space had stories. Like I thought mine were bad. Theirs were, I was like, whoa. And what it showed is we had a problem. We had a workplace problem, and we were condoning this type of behavior and allowing it. And as much as I left that meeting, I drove home. I cried in my big black truck. I drove home and I sat in my driveway, and I bawled my eyes out. And I was like, I'm going to quit. Like, I'm going to resign. I can't do this. Like what it's worth. And I was so scared because I was the primary breadwinner in our family. And so I was like, where's our insurance going to come from? I don't know what to do, but I cannot do this anymore. And I called my sponsor and I said, hey, white boy, like, I can't do this. And he was like, if you quit, I would not blame you. It is not fair that you're having to deal with anything. He said, but you don't have to make a bad financial decision for your family just because you're experiencing these things. And I was like, what are you talking about? Either I continue to experience them or I quit. Like I saw it was white or black for me, right? And so he said, no, you're going to go in on Monday. You're going to report these, and you're going to tell them that you want to put a severance on the table, and you're going to take that severance whenever you feel like taking that severance if you can continue to experience that. But you're not going to have to make a bad financial decision if you don't want to for your family. And I never even knew that was an option. I was like, why would you give me a severance? Like, they're not laying me off. He was like, oh, there's severances for everything. And I was like, oh my. And so he was a senior leader. He was executive leader in the organization. He was the one in the glass house at the top, right? And he taught me about the literally the legal side and the HR side that I had no clue was an option. He was like, no. So I walked in on Monday morning, I reported it to HR, I reported it with my manager again. I also had say, I'm not willing to share other women's stories, but here were the women in that room. You should go to them. Luckily, the person that we also shared, who was the exec sponsor, was somebody from our legal team and somebody from quality engineering. And so really, like, there were two high profile people that heard those stories. And so long story short, 6 people ended up getting terminated while they were doing the investigation. Wow. A lot of other women came forward, and I chose to not take the severance. And I remember I was sitting in HR and against 2 women slid over the package to me, and they're like, I'm sure you're gonna want this. And I was like, I didn't even look. And I didn't look, and I slid it back, and I was like, no, I'm going to be a part of the change, and I'm going to hold you accountable, actually change this workplace, because if I leave, there's nobody to hold you accountable. I said, because as long as I have here, I have the power of my story and my experience, and it's going to force you to change. And that's where, it was powerful. And I remember being so brave, and also going right back to my sponsor's office. And I literally shut the door, and I just bawled, and he hugged me. And I'm so proud of you to do that. To want to be a part of this, and to know your rights as an employee, right? And as a human who is experiencing this. And to me, it was probably the most pivotal, and why I'm able to share these, moments, and why I feel compelled to educate, predominantly women of color about their experiences, because they do have rights in the workplace. And it's about how you have to document things. There's things that I wish I had documented every single time something was said to me, who said it, where they said it, right? There's cameras. I just didn't think about those things because I was doing my job. I was senior engineer, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just hope that me sharing my story, realize it's real. You're not alone. That all the data shows that women of color experience that. While women experience these microaggressions, harassment, discrimination, we see that in all the isms. I tell people all the isms, put them in there, right? We see that women of color experience it 3 times. More. Yeah, 3 times the rate of white women. And I think that's something we need to hold space for and talk about more.
Yeah, absolutely. The couple of things that came up for me as you were talking, and I'd love to hear others' perspective on it, Sunny. You talked about just the tactical things that you could do to, you know, protect yourself or advocate for yourself, like documenting what's happening, who's saying it, all those things. You don't think about that in the moment because, for me, I am, you know, I have that armor on, and I'm just not thinking, because when you're feeling unsafe, you don't think. And so employers, you have to understand that when people aren't in safe environments, they are not thinking. You are not getting the best of someone. So make sure your environments are safe so people can think and they can contribute fully. So the documentation you talked about, just knowing your rights and going to your sponsors and your advocates, and sharing your story so that people can kind of help you along. Anyone else have experiences, maybe not directly linked, but just experiences where you've had to step up and advocate for yourself, and then also try to create an environment that's safe for others to work, and to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced, I remember when I first started at a job, and this young lady, she was just not feeling me. I was like, what? I know I'm not tripping. I know I'm not crazy. Everything that I said, I did, it just was not, we weren't vibing, which is odd for me. Because I don't know, I just was I can't figure it out. And ultimately I was a lead on a project, and she just was not helping. She was supposed to be my right hand, but she was not. She was in the back. Every time I looked, I was like, where's my help? She was not feeling it. And the very next day I was like, you know what? I'm gonna have a conversation with her. And we ended up having a conversation. I actually decided to bring someone else in, basically a mediation. And she ended up spilling all her guts. She was like, I don't like you. And I was like, heard. And it all was because, she had promised my role. When I was like, well, I didn't know that, I was like, well, I understand how you may feel. But it was something else that she told me that stuck out to me. And she basically was like, you walk in the office very confidently and you make it seem like you got it. And so that makes me not want to help you. And she was like, I am jealous of you. And so from that point on, after we had the mediation, and the other mediator was like, oh my God, thank you for sharing your story. But me, I was like, fuck that. Like, you are evil. I was like, okay. And I sat there and I remained.
Sounds like a you problem, right? It's like a you problem. Not a me problem.
But I literally in my head was like, nah, I can't. We will not be able to work together because you don't like me. You're jealous of me, and jealousy, those turns and that turns into other things. So we left that conversation. I think they thought that it went really well. She was crying, she was upset, and I was like, thank you for your time. And that very next day, I literally was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna play this game for a good 2 months. But I literally documented everything. I made sure that HR knew, and I knew that they were probably like, dang, this girl, which I do respect my HR director, because we had gotten on this text basis, and I was like, hey, I'm just letting you know this is going on. Maybe nothing, but I want to make sure that this, and I would do
someone's aware.
Yeah, every single thing. And that was probably the hardest thing I've ever gone through, and it wasn't a thing of someone doesn't like you, right? But I think it was an extra added layer, because I would give her examples in that mediation. It was like, oh, so when I asked you about this, you purposely didn't give it to me 2 weeks later so that it looked like I wasn't doing my job. Okay, that makes sense. They're outside of my job at the time. I don't want to call myself an influencer, but I had other brand things going on. And I just think that she just.
Why not? Wait, why not? Why don't you just call yourself what you are? You're beautiful. You're an influencer. Call it.
Well, we could get in my dynamic with social media. I really feel like I built up my following on social media. And now I'm I got a love-hate relationship with social media. I feel like I could go ghost from social media for 3 months if I could, and then I'll just pop out. I just feel like some people use their fame and influence for evil, and some people use it for I think you have a service when you have a following. So I'll just say that. So sometimes I'm yeah, I'm not that girl. I just feel like I put in a lot of work on my Instagram platform, but a love-hate relationship with it. But
I go to follow you on Instagram.
Exactly.
I know. Everybody who's listening, Bray Richardson, is that your Instagram handle?
It is. Yep.
But I didn't think, when you encounter people who, because I guess she saw me from afar, from my social media platform, and then I got the, all the things, and I was like, dang, people really don't like you, and it just
haters are a real thing.
Yeah. And I'm like, it's I think for me too, I think because I try to be inclusive, I feel like this particular situation I tried, but when she said that, I made an oath to myself. I was like, okay, cool, we're gonna take the paper route, babe. We are gonna document. I remember at one time, I have a really good friend, she's a lawyer. I printed out all these things. I printed out all these times where I tried to reach out. And I think I would just stress what Sunny was saying, your best advocate is yourself. And if you feel something and that gut feeling is just not right, and it don't feel right in your stomach, that intuition is just not hitting, it probably is. And I was grateful, but that I did that. But I think what sucks in that part too, or in that situation, I had to cry, in front of a higher up for them to get it. And then even with that, it became my tears quickly were why are you crying? I'm the victim. Why? Hey, let's I'm the center. So I think, I don't know, but I don't regret what I did. And I think in every situation, it's important to advocate for yourself and document things and write it down. And if it's a journal thing, 11:26 a.m., I feel like I got a side eye when I didn't have a side eye.
But we gotta say, not on your work computer, because I feel like we still have to tell my youngins, not on your work computer. You do this thing, you no.
Yeah.
Put it in a notebook, email yourself, right? Your personal
because you never know. That's another like random note. Like, please invest in your own computer. Like,
Yes.
I like my interns, like one of my interns, I'm like, girl, why are you doing that on these people's computer? Like she has a job and then she works for me, like she interns for me. And I'm like, don't do that no more. She was like, what? I was like, because that's
they can track everything.
They can track you,
That's something that sorry, my white ally, this guy that he taught me, he was like, be prepared. Like he don't bring no photos into the office. Like that is like his thing.
I feel like we need to name the white men, like they need a name, like the Richards. I don't know, but we need to get them, like the women of color need to get the white sponsor. Like we need a name for them so we know who that is, and we're not calling our sponsor because I feel like that sounds weird. Like
I know, like
listen, influencer, I'm gonna need you to coin a name or
let's coin a term.
Viral. Something. I've shouted him out on like another podcast because I just like and even like I had an event a couple months ago and he showed up and he was like, I'm just so proud of you, and like I don't think you understand the seed that you planted. Like I have given him, like I've said his formal name. I don't think he's ever even watched the podcast, but they're important, man. They're like very important.
But when both of you were speaking, something that I was thinking about is, the tears that escape, right? Like, Fred and I, we have a joke about how she's like, you will not cry at work. And I was like, but you don't understand. I was like, in that moment when you're sitting with someone and they're telling you something about yourself, or you're in your evaluation and you're like, for me, the tears are rage. It is a neurological release of my body. It's my anger. Like these are not, they're not sad tears. This is anger releasing from my body because I need to keep this job, because I need my money and I need my insurance, and I cannot punch anybody in this meeting. And I think when that happens, right, like after you finish crying, the immediate response is always like sympathy, like, oh my gosh, like why are you crying? Like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? And I'm like, I don't need that right now, because that's just making me more angry, because right now I can't even process what I really want to say in this moment. But then when you finally, okay, the tears are done, you collect yourself, whether you had to like, you could throw out your quivering lip or your tears. What I have found, the spinoff of microaggressions, when you're addressing it to a supervisor or to HR, to whatever, the gaslighting that happens.
Yes, I was waiting for this conversation.
The gaslighting, right? Like, that's not true. That's not what they meant. Oh no, but they're just like that. No, Cybes, I think you're taking it too personal, or you're too sensitive, or making it feel like it's me, that I'm the one who is seeing all the issues, or that's because you care about DEI too much. I'm like, the gaslighting on like the micro versus the macro, like the whole realm of all of the gaslighting that happens, I think is also hard to kind of navigate, because when it happens consistently over time, and you, at least me, I'll talk about myself. I'm also a person at work who multiple people come to, right? My door is the definition of being always open. And I think as women of color and only, everyone else who's like a non-white person or a or an underrepresented identity will come to me. They feel safe. I create safe spaces as a manager and team leader. I create a space in which folks will naturally, organically gravitate to me. Do you know how many people come in my organization and be like, I heard about you from so-and-so and so-and-so, and I had to meet you. Do you have time to grab a coffee? And I'm like, of course, let's go grab a coffee. And the vulnerability and stories, and I accept that. And I'm there for them. And I also tell them, like Bray was saying, document. There's really great apps right now. There's one created by a woman of color. I have no affiliation. I think it's really great. It's called Work Receipts, which I think is a really great play on words.
Oh, I love that.
You can start to document all the things that happen at work. So I tell people, like, here's what you do. Here's how you navigate. The HRs of the world are there to protect your organization.
Yes.
Not you.
Not you. Not you. They're there to protect the organization. So the more senior you are, and I think I heard Chrissy talk about this in an earlier podcast, like the more senior you are, also, there are limitations of who you can talk to. At least that's how I feel, right? I can't go talk to the president of my organization. She's not somebody who I don't have that channel. if I'm receiving something from my SVP, I'm supposed to go to HR, but the HR is also a VP, and there's no confidentiality. She's not a confidential resource necessarily. Or I've been on investigations in HR as a senior leader of this organization, and I have seen how they're run. So if it was going to happen to me, I have to document. I have external counsel. I will bring an advisor to a meeting. You do not sign any documents in the heat of the moment with HR. You take time to review. I like what Sandy said, you slide that paper back across the table and you're like, nope, I need time to process, discuss. So all these people that come to me in my organization, inside the organization, outside the organization, I tell them the same things. One, document, process, take the time you need. Don't sign anything in the moment. It's okay if you have an emotional response. Have your network that you talk to outside of your job, because not all spaces are safe spaces. And folks that you're going to and you're thinking that you're going to that are supposed to be there for you, and that you, was it not all kinfolk or not all skin folk are kinfolk, like, right?
Kinfolk.
That's not always the case, right? That's not always the case. Particularly when we're in environments where they're placing women of color against each other, or people of color against, where they're pinning us against each other. So navigating that is also super exhausting. I have a really solid network of support, like we talk about our sponsors. I have also a very solid network of support of other women of color that I can talk to and be like, oh my God, you need to understand what happened to me today. And find friends that are going to tell you the real truth, not what you think you need to hear or want to hear. But like, I have a friend who, she was like, all right, Thais, that was you. Like, you are doing the most today. And will actually tell you the truth about yourself, right? Where she's like, no, Thais, like, that's not a thing. Like, or maybe that you don't need to address that today, let it go. Don't call the friend that's like, exactly, yeah. Like, you have your hype friend that's gonna be like, egg you on and hype you up to go to HR.
Let's go burn it down.
Burn it down. Right? So like, have your network of, or your board of advisors that you can kind of go to get a solid base and opinion of how to navigate and what to do next. Because it is exhausting. It does happen a lot. If you're somebody who then people come to a lot, the burden of that responsibility in your organization, I think processing those things, because what's it called? We call it like the secondary trauma. So you're not the one who experienced it, but listening to it, the person is being vulnerable to tell you what happened to them. But you're also a shared identity, or maybe another vulnerable identity at work, and you're experiencing that trauma too. So you're like, dang, like this is terrible for multiple people across the board. How do I fix it? I'm an activator. I'm like, how do I fix it? How do I navigate? Who do I go to? How do I present to this in a concise proposal to a senior leader who is a white person who reports to another white person who has all of the power, to say like, hey, I really think that we have a problem, and not be gaslit. Or if I'm gaslit, to be able to like turn around and come back and be like, okay, here's some more solid examples of what I think we should do. And say that it shouldn't only be on me to kind of execute and deliver. It should be a shared leadership response. And I think that's kind of where some of the things are halted. I mean, we were talking earlier before we recorded about all of the organizations that are rolling back on DEI, and it's eye-opening and shuddering, and how we're going to move forward in 2025 is scary. It's scary for a lot of people. I think organizations are trying to be silent, but it's going to come to a head where it's like, well, where do you stand? Where does this organization stand? And do I feel safe at work? And if not, can I take a risk to make a jump? Or can I love that. Can I get a severance on this position to be able to navigate my own well-being?